Mayday, Mayday, the British Prime Minister's in distress. Hello and welcome to the Nexus. In today's programme, can Theresa May survive or will she be pushed out like her predecessor, Margaret Thatcher? Today, here in the Nexus, then, we are focusing on three things. Churchill had the Battle of Britain, May has the Battle of Brexit. But what chance does she have against the whole of Europe? The enemy within, after an election disaster, cabinet scandals and just bad luck. Is her own party now preparing to stab her in the back? And Prime Minister Boris? Can May keep the Foreign Secretary in check, or will the blonde bombshell take her job? We'll find out here in the Nexus. Hello, I'm Matthew Moore, and here in the Nexus, we're looking at whether Britain's Prime Minister can stay in Downing Street much longer, or will she be evicted? We've invited another Fantastic Four to help us, starting with Oliver Lane. He knows all about Downing Street. He used to work there. We also have Andrew Allison, who campaigned hard for Brexit and wants the government to be tough with Europe. We also have Vicky Pryce, the economist. She's taking the opposite view. She thinks Brexit is a big mistake. And the English comedian and satirist Ian Moore. He lives in France, for now at least. So now we're all gathered. Let's get started with the bout of the century, Mrs May's rumble in the jungle, the Battle of Brexit. It is a thrilling but uneven contest by anyone's standards. 27 EU member states combined into a heavyweight against the UK, more like a promising middleweight. In the blue corner, representing Great Britain with a population of 65 million, it's David Davis. And in the red corner, representing the EU with a population of 450 million, Michel Barnier. Every month, these two and their teams square off in Brussels. They've gone 6 rounds so far, and it's the EU setting the pace, insisting on 3 preconditions before even talking to the British about their favourite subject, trade. First up, the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and vice versa.
EU citizens make an extraordinary contribution to our national life, and we want them to stay.
Despite public promises, the status of many who have set up home on the continent or in the UK remains uncertain. The second precondition, the Irish border. A hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland contributed to decades of violence. Nobody wants to see that again, but so far, no one seems to have a solution.
What we want to take off the table before we even talk about trade is any idea that there would be a hard border, physical border, or a border resembling the past in Ireland.
And finally, the prize money. If the EU wins this one outright, the UK will have to pay as much as €100 billion to Brexit. The UK is calling this a low blow.
The sums that I have seen that they propose to demand from this country seem to me to be extortionate, and I think to go whistle is an entirely appropriate expression.
There are many more rounds to go, but this bout's scheduled to end in less than 18 months. The UK is on the ropes, desperate to score points on trade, but has repeatedly warned it's willing to throw in the towel rather than accept a bad deal. Well, let's bring in Andrew Allison now. Andrew, I don't know if you're a boxing fan, but that's the metaphor we went with. Do you think that Britain would and should be willing to throw in the towel, walk away, no deal is better than a bad deal, if it really comes to it?
I think we will get a particularly good deal. It may come to the 11th hour before we get that deal, but we will, because it's in everybody's interests to get that deal. But if we have to fall back on World Trade Organization rules, then that's not a disaster either.
Oh, what do you think about that? Vicky Pryce, let's come to you for a moment. Let's talk about falling back to World Trade Organization rules. Isn't that an expensive alternative?
Well, it is. We've got to remember that we export 5% of our goods and services to the EU. Trying to replace that by anything else is going to be very hard. And of course, the Europeans only export 7% of their goods and services to us. So they have a lot less to lose from not having a deal with us, and we have an awful lot to lose from not agreeing something sensible with them, particularly the area of services, where we could just about live with tariffs maybe, under WTO rule, but that will affect lots of sectors such as, for example, the car manufacturing sector, which will have 10% tariffs. But services are seriously important, and there are very few rules under WTO that really cover services and any disputes there may be. And there are no free trade agreements with anyone else around the world which actually cover services to the extent that they do now with the EU.
All right, let's bring in Ollie Lane now. He used to work with one of the arch Brexiteers, Michael Gove. This €45 billion divorce bill that Britain seems to be putting forward as an offer, do you think the Brexiteers would go for that?
I think we might be getting to a stage where they're prepared to accept it if that means that progress is going to be done on the other elements that are so important. I mean, it seems that Cabinet is now agreed on that point. And it shows actually that although there are some pretty clear and principled people who are in the Cabinet who want Brexit to happen, they can also change their minds and change their position to make sure that the deal goes ahead as they would want it.
Well, let's go to Ian Moore now in France. Ian, you're a comedian and satirist, but we'll get to that a little later. You're living in France, you have a family there. One of the preconditions we saw in that report was the rights of citizens living in different countries. Does this whole thing worry you a lot?
It terrifies me, yeah. My family are French, but I'm British. So I don't know what my status will be. It's very hard watching it from a distance as well. I mean, it feels like Brexit to me feels like a midlife crisis almost. The nation's having a midlife crisis and we're leaving the security in half of Europe and driving around the world in a convertible sports car looking for scantily clad trade agreements, and it just doesn't look good.
That's a superb comparison. Thank you, Ian. Well, Brexit is her biggest challenge, but will she even be around to negotiate the deal? Some are saying Theresa May could be stabbed in the back by her own Conservative Party. Here are 5 reasons why the enemy within could soon push her out. In at number 5, they've done it before. The Conservatives ousted their own leader, Margaret Thatcher, while she was still Prime Minister.
Nail that woman.
Even after she led them to 3 election victories. Ungrateful. Sensing her winning streak was over, they pushed her out of Downing Street.
We're leaving Downing Street for the last time.
Reducing the Iron Lady to tears. At 4, election disaster. Despite enjoying a comfortable majority in Parliament, May called a snap election earlier this year.
Strong and stable leadership. Who do you trust?
A massive, unforced error. After a badly managed campaign, she lost her majority and the respect of many Conservatives.
I don't think it's going to be easy to move forward from this.
At 3, just bad luck. Her big speech to apologise to her party after the disastrous election was just as farcical.
I hold my hands up. I am sorry.
She struggled on with a cough
Sounds if my voice isn't on track.
and was interrupted by a prankster telling her she was fired.
Boris asked me!
Every sign pointed to the writing being on the wall. In at 2, a cabinet mess. The Defence Secretary quit earlier this month after allegations he sexually harassed a journalist.
I may have fallen below the high standard.
Another resigned days later for holding secret meetings with Israeli politicians. And at number 1, the Brexiteers. Boris Johnson leads a cabal of Tory MPs putting pressure on the PM behind the scenes to seek a hard Brexit.
We're making progress on all fronts.
Some say they've already staged a soft coup and call May their Downing Street hostage. Question is, how much longer until the rebels reach the door of number 10? Well, there's the question. Let's go to Ollie Lane now. Ollie, as I mentioned earlier, you did work with Michael Gove, who's one of the top Brexiteers. He used to be a partner with Boris Johnson. Between the two of them, they're sort of blamed, in inverted commas, for Brexit. Do you think that they have staged a soft coup inside of Downing Street and that Theresa May is their hostage in a way?
Yeah, I mean, they wrote that letter recently, didn't they, that then got leaked by whoever. I think... you know, what they want to see is the kind of Brexit that they'd imagined, and actually the two of them disagreed pretty quickly straight after the referendum last summer. But, you know, actually they're pretty pragmatic as well. And who else really wants to do these Brexit negotiations who really wants to be the person at the end of it who says, well, this is the deal we've got? It's unlikely, we think, to be a particularly good one. So, you know, she's kind of like a shield at the moment. And whether any other Tory MP, be it Boris or Gove or someone else who wants to come forward and do the deed and then have to do all the negotiations themselves, I think it's pretty questionable. They'd rather do it post March 2019, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a certain amount of Conservative MPs to oust their leader. Andrew Allison, we heard a week ago or so that 40 Conservative MPs are willing to sign a letter to push their leader out. They just need another handful, really, another 8 or so, and it's there. You know quite a lot of Conservative MPs. Do you get the feeling there is enough numbers to push out Theresa May?
I don't think there is, really. I mean, the Prime Minister before the general election was in a real position of strength, and for a variety of reasons, a poor manifesto, a poor campaign. She's now in a much weaker position. But as has already been said, who actually wants the job now? I mean, once we get into January, February, we're getting a year or so away from Brexit. And I can't imagine even Boris Johnson really wanting to take on the job of Prime Minister at such a time. He'd be really would be.
That's a good point. Let's go back to Vicky Price for a moment. Vicky, you know all about Westminster and how really quite ruthless it can be. You used to be married to a cabinet minister. You used to work for the government yourself. We've got a picture up here of Theresa May and what looks like her sartorial hero, Margaret Thatcher. Now, you remember back in 1990 when they pushed Thatcher out. Do you think that could happen again?
I think what's going on right now is that she's there because nobody really wants the alternative. The alternative, in fact, would be probably Boris Johnson. I don't think he's particularly popular with the party, or rather with the MPs in Parliament. He's quite popular with the party, but not with the MPs. And I think Theresa May is surviving because no one really wants to either have a change at the top or with that change possibly be forced to call a general election.
Are there any other differences between then and now? For example, people are saying there just aren't the big beasts around as there was then. There was obviously there was Michael Heseltine and Lord Howe, and in the end somebody came from nowhere, John Major. Is it a completely different political landscape now?
Well, it is a bit different because, of course, there is, I mean, Europe has always featured very significantly, of course, in anything to do with the Conservatives. But right now, it is an existential crisis that we're going through. So the question is who can actually do it better? And it matters for the nation, you know, rather a lot. And what Theresa May has done, of course, is she has weakened herself hugely by calling the election back in June, which, of course, took away her majority. And now she has to rely on others to keep her going. So she is in a much weaker position, probably, than Thatcher was then, and yet she's still there because the circumstances are such that nobody really dares push her out.
Ian, we're just going to draw on your expertise as a comedian and satirist. Now we're going to focus in on something we heard in that report, the P45 moment. Let's play some of that.
Self-confident Britain. Boris asked me to give... While our opponents flirt with a foreign policy of neutrality and prepare for a run on the ground.
Boris asked me! But Boris, please say you did this! You asked me to, and now you're denying it!
Well, for those of you who don't know, in Britain, getting the P45 form that he handed over means you're sacked. So, Ian Moore, as a political satirist prank, was that a good one?
Well, it was fairly obvious. The P45 was fairly obvious, I think, and I've worked with Simon a lot, and he's done other ones like that with FIFA as well.
Yeah.
The thing is, as a stand-up comedian, watching Theresa May there, as a stand-up comedian, we've all been in that position where you get the dry mouth because you don't actually believe in your material. The backdrop falls apart. You've got a heckler who's getting more attention than you are. It's a desperate situation. But the worst thing you can do is that people come out of that going, well, I feel quite sorry for her. And that is best now. If you have if the audience sorry for you, you've lost it.
I know that's one of the things we kept hearing on the radio and TV afterwards, that how well she struggled on with the cough. But nobody wants a leader who's a good victim, do they? Ian, stay with us. Now, we're going to get out of the studio for a minute and give the public a chance to comment on the Prime Minister.
I think her legacy is going to be one of she's taken Brexit. Whatever she does as far as Home Affairs are concerned, it's been forgotten, unfortunately.
Given all the problems she has, including a divided cabinet, she's making a pretty good job of it.
There's a lot of things going on wrong, but the Prime Minister, she can't do as much. She's done everything she could.
She's leading through fear rather than integrity and belief.
Well, I think she's got an impossible job, but I don't think she's the right person to do the job.
Very ineffectual and just not a leader.
She had the potential to be a good Prime Minister, but I think calling that snap general election and losing her majority really weakened her. And now, sadly, I feel she's quite weak, but I can't see who could take her place.
Well, that's a good question. Who would replace her? Let's go quickly through the panel. And I just want one name, please. Just speculate for a moment. Who do you think has the best chance of being the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? Let's start with you, Ollie Lane.
Best chance? Probably Boris.
Boris, OK. Andrew?
I agree, probably Boris.
Ian?
Boris or Amber Rudd.
Are you just going with the majority, Ian?
No, I think Boris. I think Boris really wants it. Boris wants to be seen as Churchillian, but Churchill rode, magnificently in a time of national crisis, whereas Boris has created a national crisis, and the two aren't the same.
Punchy. OK, and Vicky, just a name, please.
Yes, the same.
Boris. All right. Well, seeing as everyone thinks it's Boris, let's take a look at who he is. Highly educated, charming, international, and a hugely accomplished politician. He has all the qualities to become Prime Minister. Or maybe not. To some, he's Britain's biggest buffoon, an embarrassment on the world stage, and the man who tipped Britain into Brexit crisis. So which is it? Well, it's a bit of both. He does have an international background. Born in Manhattan to British parents, he also has Turkish, German, French and Russian ancestors. He describes himself as a one-man melting pot. He is, of course, highly educated, winning a scholarship to Britain's most famous school, Eton, and then a scholarship to Oxford. There he mixed with a generation of undergraduates who came to dominate British politics, including Britain's future Prime Minister, David Cameron. So why does he sometimes talk total nonsense? Here he is complaining about the EU before the referendum.
It makes me think of some badly designed undergarment that has now become too tight in some places, far too tight, far too constrictive, and dangerously loose in other places.
As a politician, he has had some big achievements, winning 2 terms as Mayor of London, and he did help the Olympics for the British capital. But even as Mayor, he did look silly at times, stuck up on a zip wire, looking totally helpless. And on a trip to Japan, a rugby game turns into another PR mess as Boris knocks over a little boy in a bone-crunching collision. But he keeps climbing the ladder and is now Foreign Secretary. An odd choice when you consider he once compared Hillary Clinton to a sadistic nurse in a mental hospital. And he caused outrage by quoting a Rudyard Kipling poem at Myanmar's most holy Buddhist site.
Come you back, you English soldier. You remember that?
A hint of colonialism that embarrassed even Britain's ambassador there.
Not appropriate.
And Boris can be ruthless. He campaigned in favour of Brexit against the wishes of his old Oxford chum, David Cameron. And when the Prime Minister resigned after failing to keep Britain in the EU...
I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
Boris jumped at the chance to replace him. But his allies deserted him, and Theresa May won the leadership contest, leaving Boris with egg on his face once again. But still the most likely candidate to be the next leader of this country, apparently. Let's go to Ollie Lane. Ollie, simple question, really. Does Boris want the job, and would he go for it?
I think he pretty clearly wants the job, and he has for a while. Would he go for it? I think he probably wants to get the other side of Brexit, so March 2019. Time is actually running out for him. So he needs to get on with it pretty quickly after that. And actually, you know what? He's got this kind of broad appeal. And if you talk to people in the Vote Leave campaign, they'll say that he was critically important to that, to bring in votes from outside the kind of obvious levers. And also, as you mentioned in that piece just now, he won the Mayor of London race twice, which for a Tory shows that broad appeal.
Well, yeah, he's a serious politician at times, but he does have another side to him. As someone who's an expert in communications and in reputation, would he be your nightmare customer?
He'd be your dream customer and your nightmare customer, all wrapped in one, I think. He gets wonderful coverage for lots of things. He dominated conference, but you were always a bit worried about what he's going to say at what time. So it kind of, he's not someone I suspect who wants to be kept on a tight leash either.
Would it be easier to help than Theresa May?
Theresa May is not a natural performer. She doesn't like the camera very much. She's not one for quick, easy sound bites. But actually, there's stuff you can do with Theresa May, I think, to kind of get her more visible, get her meeting people, so that she does show that she's in touch with people.
OK, let's bring in
Andrew
Allison.
She needs to do a lot of that to kind of repair things at the moment.
Oh, thank you, Ollie. Andrew Allison, you are a Conservative. You're happy to be known as such. I just wanted to ask you if you think that Boris Johnson is disloyal.
Oh, Boris is just Boris.
Oh,
everywhere,
no, Boris is just Boris.
Everywhere he goes, he's mobbed. I remember during the Vote Leave campaign, a friend of mine was up in Scarborough, North Yorkshire. Boris got off the bus on a council estate in North Yorkshire, and he was mobbed. You've shown his charge sheet there, and the thing with the zip wire at the Olympics. I remember David Cameron saying that for any other politician it would spell disaster, but somehow Boris turns that into a triumph, being stuck on the zip wire.
That's true.
I think Boris does what he wants to do, and Boris does what he thinks is right. Some people may call that disloyal. I don't think it's...
Yeah, it's interesting, Andrew. I mean, we've got a bit of picture here from the Tory party conference, the Conservative Party conference. If you look closely, you see Amber Rudd, who's been mentioned. She sort of has to prompt Boris to get up out of respect for the Prime Minister. That's just speculation. I don't know if that's true or not. Perhaps you do.
Well, I've heard the story and I've seen the pictures, and maybe so. But I think, just to reiterate, I don't think Boris is a great team there. I think everybody knows that. Boris tends to do things for Boris, and he's not very popular with backbench Conservative MPs, or as many perhaps should be. But he is popular with the party.
OK, Vicky, Andy, and we're going to come back to you in a moment. We have got a couple of interesting sound bites from the streets of London about Boris. Here's what people think.
I reckon he's going to be a Class A joke. Yeah, just a funny guy. Yeah, can we take him seriously as a Prime Minister? Probably not.
Seems a nice guy, but I wouldn't want him running the country.
I'm, slightly to the right of centre, so I should be leaning towards that sort of person. But Boris, really, he's a buffoon.
He's just a bit eccentric. So that's all I've got.
Give the people what they want to hear, but behind closed doors, siphon off money and create policies for the very few.
Well, some amusing remarks at least. What would you expect about Boris? Vicky, if I could come to you for a moment, just to say, you speak with a very clear and upper crust English accent now, but it's actually the case that you started life in Greece and came over to this country at 17. So you also go back to Greece quite frequently, and you have the sort of European perspective as well. What do the Europeans make of Boris Johnson? Would they give him more or less respect than Theresa May?
I think they're very surprised that we have, as a Foreign Secretary, somebody like Boris. He's not actually taken particularly seriously across Europe, I have to say, and even in Greece, and of course Greece has been through its own problems. So it gives you an idea of how he would be viewed. But the issue, of course, is that the party members actually rather like him, or it looks like they do, even though, as you've just been hearing from people on the streets of London, they don't think he's particularly serious as a Prime Minister, or as a possible potential Prime Minister.
Looking at it from an economist perspective, you do have to have a command of detail and be a very serious character. At times, he doesn't look like he's taking his job very serious at all.
Well, no. I think what he really wants to be is Prime Minister. I don't think he was particularly cut out to be a Foreign Secretary, frankly. Well, maybe he'll grow in the job if he stays there long enough. But what he does generally is to improve his political position. And we know that he wrote 2 letters trying to decide whether to go for Brexit or against Brexit in the referendum campaign. He decided a different way, go in favour of Brexit because it would be good for his career, or so we assume. That's what everyone says. And I do think that if he were to become Prime Minister, he would actually want to stay there. And presiding over a country that might actually not do well at all in the future won't be something that he really wants to do. So I have great faith in Boris being able to change his mind again and convince the population along those lines too.
Fair enough. Let's quickly go back to Ian Moore in France. Ian, two questions. One is, what's your favourite Boris joke? We'll get to that in a second. But very quickly, what does the French media think of Boris? Do they make fun of him?
I don't know if they make fun of him. I think they're very wary of him. I think he's a very almost un-British character. If our reputation is stiff upper lip, if you like, Boris is the very antithesis of that. So if you're in a when I'm in a conversation with somebody about Boris, I always remind everybody he was born in America. Nothing to do with that.
Oh, well, Ian, last thing, your favourite Boris joke of all time, even if it's not yours, I don't mind. Just tell it well.
I've only heard one, and that is, why did Boris cross the road for personal political gain after giving David Cameron assurances that he wouldn't cross to the other side?
Oh, cynical. Ian Moore in France, thank you very much. Vicky Price, thank you for your contribution as well. And Andrew Allison, thank you. And Ollie Lane, of course, thanks for your insights from Downing Street. Well, that is it for this week. Next week, we're looking at Robert Mugabe. Why do leaders cling on so desperately? See you then. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.